The grand ballroom of Harmony Point buzzed with conversations in a dozen different languages. Ambassador Helen Carter stood near the tall windows that looked out into space, watching the most important diplomatic gathering of the year unfold before her eyes. Representatives from every major species in the Galactic Alliance had come to celebrate another year of peace and cooperation, but Helen could see the cracks beneath the polished surface. Princess Zarathea of the Corvani Empire stood alone near the refreshment tables, her massive frame making her impossible to miss, even in the crowded room. At nearly 9 feet tall, with 4 powerful arms and skin that shimmered like blue crystal, she was both beautiful and intimidating. Her golden eyes swept across the room as various alien dignitaries found reasons to avoid her section of the ballroom. Helen had been watching this dance of rejection for over an hour now. The Zephyrian trade minister had suddenly remembered an urgent communication when his aide suggested an introduction. The Altarian ambassador had developed a mysterious headache when the Corvani delegation approached. Even the usually diplomatic Centauri representatives had made polite excuses to move to the opposite side of the room. The princess maintained her composure through it all, but Helen was close enough to see the pain that flickered across her face with each snub. Princess Zarathea was one of the most educated beings in known space, fluent in 17 languages, and holding advanced degrees from the finest universities in the galaxy. Yet none of that seemed to matter when potential suitors took one look at her imposing size and found reasons to be elsewhere. Sergeant Jake Murphy checked his watch and adjusted his position near the main entrance. He had been assigned security duty for the Unity celebration, which mostly meant standing around looking official while the real diplomats did their work. As a human, he was still getting used to the complex social dynamics between different alien species. Humans had only joined the Galactic Alliance 15 years ago, making them newcomers to a political system that had existed for centuries. Jake found himself watching the tall blue princess more than he probably should have been. There was something about her quiet dignity that impressed him. He had seen plenty of people handle rejection before, but never with such grace. Every time someone avoided her, she simply smiled and moved on to the next conversation, as if she genuinely believed the next person might be different. The Thraxian delegate approached the refreshment area, where Princess Zarathea was standing. Jake had dealt with Thraxians before, and knew they could be arrogant, but he hoped this interaction might go better than the others. The princess straightened slightly as the lizard-like alien approached, and Jake could see the hope in her posture. Conversation lasted less than 30 seconds before the Thraxian's voice rose loud enough for half the room to hear. "I was told there would be suitable company at this gathering," he said with obvious disdain. "Not primitives who belong in a museum display about ancient warriors." The ballroom fell silent. Princess Zarathea's 4 hands clenched briefly before. She regained control, but Jake could see the humiliation burning in her golden eyes. The other guests pretended not to notice, quickly resuming their conversations to avoid the awkwardness of the moment. Something hot and angry sparked in Jake's chest. He had been raised to believe that everyone deserved basic respect, regardless of how they looked or where they came from. Without thinking, he stepped away from his post and walked directly toward the Thraxian delegate. "Excuse me," Jake said politely but firmly. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." The Thraxian turned to look at him with obvious annoyance. "And you are?" "Sergeant Jake Murphy, Earth Defense Force," he replied. "And I couldn't help but notice that you seem to have mistaken one of the most accomplished beings in this room for something primitive." Princess Zarathea stared at him in shock. No one had ever defended her publicly before, especially not someone who had no political obligation to do so. The Thraxian scales darkened with anger. How dare a human lecture me about proper society? The delegate hissed. "Your species has barely crawled out of its own star system." Jake smiled calmly. Maybe that's why we can see things more clearly. We don't have centuries of prejudice clouding our judgment. The confrontation was drawing attention from across the room. Captain Lisa Ford, Jake's commanding officer, was pushing through the crowd with a look of barely controlled panic on her face. Ambassador Carter had also noticed the commotion and was moving closer to assess the diplomatic damage. Princess Zarathea holds more advanced degrees than most beings in this room, Jake continued. She speaks more languages than our universal translators can handle, and she's contributed groundbreaking research to xenobiology that benefits every species here tonight. If that's primitive, then I'd hate to see what you consider civilized. The Thraxian sputtered in outrage, but before he could respond, Captain Ford reached them. Sergeant Murphy, return to your post immediately, she ordered. Jake looked at Princess Zarathea one more time and saw something new in her golden eyes. The pain was still there, but it was mixed with gratitude and something that might have been hope. He nodded respectfully to her before following his captain across the room. As the crowd slowly returned to their conversations, Princess Zarathea remained where she was, her mind replaying what had just happened. For the first time in her adult life, someone had seen her worth without being commanded to do so. The human soldier had risked his career to defend her honor, and he had gained nothing from it except trouble with his superiors. She watched as Captain Ford spoke sternly to Jake near the entrance, clearly giving him a serious reprimand for causing a diplomatic incident. But even as he accepted the lecture, Jake glanced back in her direction once, and their eyes met across the crowded ballroom. Princess Zarathea made a decision that would change both their lives forever. She walked purposefully toward the human delegation area, her four arms moving with graceful determination. Ambassador Carter noticed her approach and stepped forward with a diplomatic smile. Ambassador Carter, the princess said in perfect English, I would like to request a private audience with Sergeant Murphy at his earliest convenience. I believe we have much to discuss about human perspectives on interspecies relations. Helen Carter's eyebrows rose slightly, but she maintained her diplomatic composure. Of course, Your Highness. I'm sure the sergeant would be honored to share his insights. Across the room, Jake felt a strange mixture of anticipation and nervousness as he realized his simple act of decency had opened a door he never expected to walk through. The cultural exchange room on Harmony Point was smaller than Jake had expected, with comfortable seating arranged around low tables designed to accommodate beings of different sizes. Princess Zarathea was already there when he arrived, sitting gracefully despite her impressive height. She had chosen a simple blue dress that complemented her crystalline skin, and Jake noticed she seemed more relaxed than she had at the formal dinner 3 days earlier. Thank you for coming, Sergeant Murphy, she said as he entered. Her voice was melodic, with an accent that made English sound almost musical. Please, sit wherever you feel comfortable. Jake chose a chair across from her and tried not to stare at her four arms as she poured tea from an elegant silver service. Each movement was fluid and purposeful, with her secondary arms handling tasks while her primary hands maintained perfect poise. You can call me Jake, Your Highness, and thank you for the invitation. Zara, she replied with a smile. If we are to have honest cultural exchange, we should use our given names. Over the next hour, Jake learned more about Corvani society than he had in all his diplomatic briefings combined. Zara explained that her people had once been warriors, with their four arms and great size serving them well in ancient battles. But as their civilization advanced, they had come to value intellectual pursuits over physical prowess. The modern Corvani nobility prized elegance, refinement, and subtle political maneuvering. I am what your people might call a throwback, Zara said without bitterness. My size and strength mark me as primitive by current standards. Most Corvani my age are barely 6 feet tall and have arms that are more decorative than functional. Jake shook his head in disbelief. But you're brilliant. I've read some of your papers on xenobiology. The research on cross-species genetic compatibility has helped dozens of worlds. Zara's golden eyes brightened with surprise. You have read my work? I may just be a soldier, but I like to learn things, Jake replied. Your theory about environmental adaptation triggers was fascinating. It could explain why some species thrive on colony worlds while others struggle. For the first time since Jake had known her, Zara looked genuinely happy. No one has ever discussed my research with me before. Even my own people treat it as an embarrassing hobby. Their meetings became a regular occurrence, officially designated as cultural exchange sessions to avoid political complications. Zara taught Jake about Corvani art, showing him how their four-dimensional sculptures could only be properly appreciated by beings with multiple sets of arms. She shared their music, which used harmonic frequencies that created different emotional responses in various species. In return, Jake introduced her to human literature and philosophy. He brought her books by writers from across Earth's cultures, explaining how humanity's diversity had shaped their approach to problem-solving. Zara was particularly fascinated by human concepts of individual choice and personal freedom. On my world, everything is decided by tradition and social position, she told him during one of their afternoon sessions. The idea that humans can choose their own paths regardless of their birth circumstances is remarkable. Jake found himself looking forward to these meetings more than he should have. Zara was not just intelligent, but curious about everything. She asked endless questions about Earth's history, wanting to understand how such a young species had managed to develop faster than light travel and join the galactic community so quickly. Humans seemed to excel at seeing new possibilities. Observed, other species become locked into patterns of thinking that last for generations, but your people adapt quickly to changing circumstances. Meanwhile, the political situation surrounding Zara continued to deteriorate. Jake overheard conversations in the diplomatic corridors about the Corvani problem and how Emperor Drakmar was facing increasing pressure from his High Council to find a solution for his unmarried daughter. During one particularly difficult week, 3 more potential suitors visited Harmony Point. Each meeting ended the same way, with polite excuses and hasty departures. Jake watched Zara's confidence slowly erode as rejection followed rejection. Perhaps they are right, she said quietly during one of their sessions. Perhaps I am simply too different, too much of a reminder of what my people used to be. That's nonsense, Jake replied firmly. You're not different. You're exceptional. Anyone who can't see that doesn't deserve you. Zara looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. You truly believe that? I know it, Jake said. You're one of the most remarkable people I've ever met, regardless of species. Ambassador Carter had been keeping a discreet eye on the cultural exchange sessions, and she was beginning to worry about what she was seeing. Jake was clearly developing feelings for the princess, and from what Carter could observe, those feelings might be reciprocated. The political implications were staggering. She finally decided to speak with Jake privately after his latest session with Zara. She found him in the human quarters, reading one of the Corvani philosophy books the princess had lent him. Jake, we need to talk, Carter said as she entered his small living space. He looked up from the book, immediately knowing from her tone that this conversation would not be pleasant. Is this about the cultural exchange program? It's about you. Developing feelings for an alien princess who is completely off limits, Carter said bluntly. I've been watching you two together, and I can see what's happening. Jake set the book aside carefully. What's happening is that I'm getting to know someone who has been treated unfairly by everyone around her. Jake, you're a good man with a good heart, but you're playing with forces beyond your understanding, Carter continued. Princess Zarathea is not just any alien. She's royalty from one of the most powerful empires in the galaxy. Her marriage will determine military alliances, trade agreements, and political stability for generations. What if she doesn't want any of that? Jake asked. What if she just wants to be treated like a person instead of a political asset? Carter sighed deeply. What she wants may not matter. And even if it did, the practical obstacles are insurmountable. You're from different species, different worlds, different social classes. The cultural barriers alone would be overwhelming. After Carter left, Jake sat alone with his thoughts for a long time. He tried to tell himself that she was right, that he was being foolish to develop feelings for someone so far beyond his reach. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw Zara's face when she talked about her research, or the way she laughed when he told her stories about Earth Dot the next morning. Zara was waiting for him in the cultural exchange room as usual, but something was different. She seemed nervous, almost shy, as she arranged the tea service. "Jake," she said without looking at him, "I need to tell you something important." He sat down across from her, noting the careful distance she had maintained between their chairs. "What is it?" "Yesterday, I received another proposal of marriage," she began, "from the Altarian Confederation." It was declined before the messenger finished speaking. Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach. "I'm sorry." "I am not," Zara said, finally meeting his eyes. "For the first time in my life, I understand what I truly want. And it has nothing to do with political alliances or dynastic obligations." The silence stretched between them, filled with possibilities neither dared to speak aloud. Outside the windows, ships from a dozen different worlds moved through the space around Harmony Point, carrying beings who would never understand the connection growing between a human soldier and an alien princess. Jake could not sleep that night. He paced his small quarters on Harmony Point, his mind spinning with thoughts he had been trying to ignore for weeks. Every rational part of his brain told him that what he was considering was impossible. But his heart refused to listen to reason. He had watched Zara endure another humiliating rejection that afternoon when a Kose Centauri noble had taken one look at her and announced that his family could never accept such a physically imposing partner. The princess had maintained her dignity as always, but Jake had seen the pain in her golden eyes, and something inside him had snapped the next morning. Jake requested a formal meeting with Captain Lisa Ford. She found him waiting outside her office at exactly 0800 hours, standing at attention with a folder of documents in his hand. "What can I do for you, Sergeant?" she asked as they entered her office. "Ma'am, I would like to request permission to formally court Princess Zarathea of the Corvani Empire," Jake said without preamble. Captain Ford nearly dropped the coffee mug she had been reaching for. "I'm sorry. Did you just say what I think?" "You said?" "Yes, ma'am. I am requesting formal permission to court the princess with the intention of marriage." Ford sat down heavily in her chair, staring at Jake as if he had suddenly grown a second head. "Sergeant, are you suffering from some kind of mental breakdown?" "No, ma'am. I am completely serious." Jake placed the folder on her desk. "I have prepared a detailed proposal outlining the strategic benefits of a human Corvani alliance through marriage." Captain Ford opened the folder with trembling hands and began reading. Jake had clearly spent considerable time researching Corvani customs, human diplomatic precedents, and the current political climate in the galaxy. His analysis was thorough and surprisingly sophisticated for a sergeant with no formal diplomatic training. "Jake, this is insane," Ford said after reading several pages. "You're talking about marrying an alien princess. The complications alone would be overwhelming. With respect, ma'am, every interspecies alliance was considered impossible until someone made it happen," Jake replied. "Humans have an advantage here because we have no existing prejudices against Corvani physical characteristics." Ford continued reading, her expression growing more troubled with each page. Despite the absurdity of the situation, Jake's arguments were actually compelling. A marriage alliance between humans and Corvani would indeed provide significant strategic benefits for both species. Even if I were to approve this, which I am not saying I will, you would need authorization from Admiral Peter Cole, Ford said finally. And I guarantee you that he will think you have lost your mind. And I'll convince him otherwise. Jake said with quiet determination that Admiral Cole's reaction was exactly what Captain Ford had predicted. The elderly commander listened to Jake's presentation with growing disbelief, occasionally shaking his head as if trying to wake up from a strange dream. Sergeant Murphy, in 30 years of military service, I have heard some unusual requests, but this definitely tops the list, Cole said when Jake finished speaking. You want to marry an alien princess who is twice your size and has 4 arms. Size and number of limbs are irrelevant factors, sir, Jake replied. Princess Zarathea is brilliant, accomplished, and has been treated shamefully by potential suitors who judge her based solely on physical appearance. Cole studied the proposal documents with the same careful attention Captain Ford had shown. Despite his initial shock, he was beginning to see the political possibilities. Humanity was still relatively new to galactic politics, and a marriage alliance with a major empire could significantly enhance their position. The strategic analysis is sound, Cole admitted reluctantly. But have you considered the personal costs? You would be giving up any hope of a normal life. What's normal about serving on a space station surrounded by dozens of alien species? Jake asked. Sir, I've found someone who shares my values and interests, someone who makes me want to be a better person. The fact that she happens to be alien royalty is irrelevant. Meanwhile, word of Jake's formal request was spreading through the human delegation. Ambassador Carter found herself fielding questions from various department heads about the Murphy situation and its potential diplomatic ramifications. When Carter finally confronted Jake directly, she found him in the cultural exchange room with Princess Zarathea, teaching her to play chess with a magnetic set designed for zero-gravity environments. Jake, may I speak with you privately? Carter asked. Zara immediately began to rise. I should go. Actually, Your Highness, this concerns you as well, Carter said. Jake has submitted a formal request to court you. Zara's 4 hands froze over the chess pieces, and she turned to stare at Jake with wide golden eyes. You did what? I requested permission to court you properly, according to both human and Corvani traditions, Jake said, meeting her gaze steadily. I should have discussed it with you first, but I was afraid you might try to talk me out of it. Jake, this is impossible, Zara whispered. My father would never approve, and even if he did, the political complications would be enormous. Maybe, Jake replied, but you deserve someone who sees your worth, who appreciates your intelligence and kindness. If that someone happens to be me, then I'm willing to face whatever complications arise. Ambassador Carter watched the exchange with fascination. She could see the genuine affection between them, but she also understood the massive obstacles they would face. The news reached Emperor Drachmer within hours through official diplomatic channels. The Corvani ruler's initial reaction was outrage at the presumption of a human soldier. But as his advisors presented the strategic implications, his anger gave way to careful consideration. The Corvani High Council erupted in heated debate when the Emperor presented Jake's proposal. Traditional counselors denounced the idea as an insult to their ancient bloodlines, while progressive voices argued that human military technology and expanding influence made them valuable allies. The human species has demonstrated remarkable adaptability and innovation, argued Counselor Vextar. Their rapid advancement from planetary to interstellar civilization is unprecedented. An alliance through marriage could provide significant benefits. You speak of allying our noble bloodline with primitives who have barely left their home system, countered Counselor Morgan. The princess deserves a mate worthy of her station. Emperor Drakmer listened to the arguments with growing interest. His daughter had been rejected by every suitable partner in known space, and the constant humiliation was becoming a political liability. Perhaps an unconventional solution was exactly what the situation required. On Harmony Point, Jake underwent the traditional Corvani trials of worthiness, ancient tests designed to evaluate potential suitors. The physical challenges were nearly impossible for a two-armed human, but Jake's determination and creative problem-solving impressed even his harshest critics. Princess Zarathea watched every trial, her anxiety obvious to anyone who knew her. Well, when Jake completed the final test, successfully navigating a complex maze while carrying ceremonial weights designed for four-armed beings, she could no longer contain her emotions. "You magnificent fool," she said as he approached her, exhausted but triumphant. "Do you have any idea what you have gotten yourself into?" "I have some idea," Jake replied, accepting a ceremonial cloth from her to wipe the sweat from his face. "But I figured it was worth it if it meant I could spend my life with you." Zara's golden eyes filled with tears as she realized that someone had finally chosen her, not despite her differences, but because of who she truly was. For the first time in her life, she felt truly valued and loved. The formal announcement of their engagement sent shockwaves throughout the Galactic Alliance. News networks across dozens of worlds covered the story of the human soldier who had proposed to the alien princess no one else wanted. Some reactions were positive, with many species praising the courage and romanticism of the gesture. Others were skeptical, viewing it as either a human publicity stunt or evidence of dangerous ambition. But regardless of their opinions, everyone agreed that the engagement would change interspecies relations forever. As Jake and Zara stood together on the observation deck of Harmony Point, watching ships from across the galaxy arrive for their engagement celebration, they knew they had begun something that would be remembered long after they were gone. The engagement announcement triggered reactions across the galaxy that ranged from celebration to outrage. Jake found himself at the center of a media storm that he was completely unprepared for. Reporters from dozens of worlds wanted interviews. Political analysts debated the implications on news programs, and social media networks buzzed with opinions about the unlikely couple. On Earth, Jake's family received the news through an official communication from the Earth Defense Force. His parents, Robert and Linda Murphy, sat in their small kitchen in Ohio, staring at the holographic message that had just informed them their son was engaged to an alien princess. "I need to sit down," Linda said, even though she was already sitting. "You are sitting, honey," Robert replied, equally stunned. Jake's sister Emma, who had always been closest to him, was the first to recover from the shock. "Good for him," she said firmly. "Jake always did see the best in people. If he loves her, then she must be amazing." The reaction from the human public was mixed but generally positive. Many saw it as a romantic fairy tale, while others viewed it as evidence of humanity's growing influence in galactic politics. A few extremist groups denounced it as a betrayal of human purity, but they were vastly outnumbered by supporters who admired Jake's courage. Princess Zarathea faced her own challenges as news of the engagement spread through Corvani society. Conservative nobles who had previously ignored her now felt free to voice their disapproval publicly. Several influential families threatened to withdraw their support from Emperor Drakmer if he allowed the marriage to proceed. "She dishonors our entire species by accepting a proposal from a primitive human," declared Duke Colvan during a televised interview. "This marriage would make us a laughingstock throughout the galaxy." But Zara also discovered she had supporters she never knew existed. Common Corvani citizens, especially those who retained more of the traditional physical characteristics, began speaking out in favor of the engagement. They saw it as validation that their ancestral traits were not something to be ashamed of. The couple found themselves navigating a complex web of cultural expectations as they planned their future together. Zara spent hours teaching Jake the intricacies of Corvani royal protocol, while he introduced her to human customs and traditions that she found both fascinating and bewildering. Your people actually choose their own romantic partners without consulting their families? Zara asked during one of their planning sessions. Usually, Jake replied, though most parents like to meet the person their child wants to marry, and they are allowed to disapprove. They can express their opinions, but the final decision belongs to the couple. Zara shook her head in amazement. Such freedom must be both liberating and terrifying. The practical aspects of their union presented numerous challenges. They needed to decide where they would live, how they would blend their different cultural traditions, and what role Zara would play in human society. Ambassador Carter worked tirelessly to negotiate the diplomatic framework that would make their marriage legally valid across multiple jurisdictions. The Thraxian Confederacy, longtime rivals of the Corvani Empire, saw an opportunity to undermine their enemies by spreading propaganda about the engagement. Thraxian news networks ran stories questioning human motives and suggesting that the marriage was part of a larger plot to infiltrate alien governments. Can we really trust a species that manipulates royal families through romantic deception? Asked a prominent Thraxian commentator. This so-called love story may be nothing more than an elaborate intelligence operation. These efforts backfired when other species recognized the obvious genuine affection between Jake and Zara. Video footage of their interactions showed none of the calculated behavior expected from professional spies, only the awkward tenderness of two beings learning to love across cultural boundaries. The crisis that nearly destroyed their engagement came without warning. A group of Corvani extremists, led by the fanatical noble Tormad, decided that the only way to prevent the marriage was to remove Princess Zarathea from the equation entirely. They planned to kidnap her during a diplomatic function and hold her until she agreed to renounce the engagement. The attack occurred during a cultural celebration aboard Harmony Point. Jake was across the station attending a briefing with Admiral Cole when the alarm sounded. Security footage showed armed Corvani in traditional battle armor overwhelming Zara's personal guards and forcing her toward a docking bay where a fast ship waited. Jake's reaction was immediate and instinctive. Without waiting for orders or backup, he armed himself and headed for the docking bay at a dead run. Captain Ford and a team of human security officers followed, but Jake reached the scene first. He found Zara being dragged toward the ship by 6 armored Corvani, their leader shouting demands that she renounce her engagement to preserve family honor. Zara was fighting back with all 4 arms, but she was outnumbered, and her ceremonial dress hindered her movement. "Let her go," Jake called out, his weapon trained on the leader. "Ah, the human arrives," Tormad replied mockingly. "Come to rescue. Your alien prize? I've come to rescue the woman I love from cowards who attack the innocent." Jake shot back. The standoff lasted only moments before Corvani security forces arrived, led by General Vaxtel, Emperor Drakmar's most trusted military commander. The extremists were quickly surrounded and overwhelmed, but not before Jake had demonstrated his willingness to risk everything to protect Zara Dot. As the dust settled and the attackers were taken into custody, Zara threw her 4 arms around Jake in an embrace that lifted him completely off the ground. "You came for me," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Always," Jake replied simply. "No matter what happens, I will always come for you." General Vaxtel observed this exchange with interest. He had been skeptical about the human soldier's worthiness, but watching Jake risk his life without hesitation to protect the princess had answered many of his questions about human character and commitment. The rescue operation became a powerful symbol of cooperation between human and Corvani forces. Video of the joint security response was broadcast across the galaxy, showing how effectively the two species could work together when they shared common goals. Emperor Drakmar's reaction to the kidnapping attempt was swift and decisive. Extremists were stripped of their titles and exiled from Corvani space, while their leader Tormad faced charges of treason. More importantly, the Emperor announced his full support for his daughter's engagement and began formal preparations for a royal wedding. The human Sergeant Murphy has proven his worthiness beyond any doubt, the Emperor declared in an official statement. He has shown that love transcends species boundaries and that courage exists in beings of all origins. The announcement silenced most remaining opposition to the marriage within Corvani society. Even nobles who had previously objected were forced to acknowledge that Jake had demonstrated the warrior virtues their people still respected. Even if they no longer practiced them. As wedding preparations began in earnest, Jake and Zara found themselves overwhelmed by the complexity of planning an event that would accommodate guests from dozens of different species. They needed venues that could handle varying atmospheric requirements, food that could be safely consumed by different physiologies, and entertainment that could be appreciated across cultural boundaries. I never imagined my wedding would require an environmental engineering team, Zara said as they reviewed the preliminary plans. I never imagined I would have a wedding attended by beings from across the galaxy, Jake replied. But then again, I never imagined I would fall in love with an alien princess. Zara smiled and took his hand with one of her four. Are you having second thoughts? Jake squeezed her hand gently. Never, though I am wondering if we should have eloped. Too late for that, Zara said with a laugh. My father has already invited representatives from every major world in the Alliance. This is going to be the most watched wedding in galactic history. As they stood together looking out at the stars, both Jake and Zara knew that their greatest challenges still lay ahead. But they also knew that they would face those challenges together, and that their love had already proven stronger than the forces trying to tear them apart. The neutral world of Haven Prime had never hosted an event quite like the royal wedding of Princess Zarathea and Sergeant Jake Murphy. Ships from across the galaxy filled the orbital space around the planet, carrying representatives from every major species in the known universe. The planetary government had declared a week-long celebration, and the capital city buzzed with excitement as beings who rarely shared the same space prepared to witness history. Jake stood in his preparation chamber, adjusting the specially designed uniform that combined human military traditions with Corvani royal symbols. The outfit had taken 3 weeks to create, with tailors from both cultures working together to produce something that honored both traditions without overwhelming his human frame. Admiral Cole entered the room, carrying a small wooden box. A gift from your parents, he said. They wanted you to have something from Earth on your wedding day. Inside the box was Jake's grandfather's watch, a simple timepiece that had been carried through 3 wars on Earth. His father had included a note. Time moves differently for everyone, but love makes every moment count. Meanwhile, in the bride's preparation chamber, Princess Zarathea was surrounded by attendants from multiple worlds who were helping her prepare for the ceremony. Her wedding gown was a masterpiece of interspecies design, incorporating crystalline elements that complemented her skin, while flowing lines that accommodated her forearms and impressive height. Emperor Drakmar entered the chamber, and the attendants quickly withdrew to give father and daughter privacy. You look radiant, my child, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I am nervous, Zara admitted. So many people watching, so many expectations. You are marrying for love, her father replied. That is rarer and more precious than any political alliance. I am proud of your courage. The ceremony took place in Haven Prime's Great Assembly Hall. a vast amphitheater designed to accommodate beings of all sizes and atmospheric requirements. The venue was filled with representatives from dozens of species, each delegation wearing their finest ceremonial attire. Jake's family sat in the front row, looking somewhat overwhelmed by the grandeur, but beaming with pride. His mother, Linda, wore the nicest dress she owned, while his father, Robert, kept adjusting his tie nervously. Emma sat between them, recording everything on a small camera to share with relatives back on Earth. Ambassador Carter served as the human witness, wearing full diplomatic regalia for the occasion. General Vaxtel represented the Corvani military, having developed genuine respect for Jake following the rescue operation. Even some former critics attended, drawn by curiosity about this unprecedented union. The processional began with traditional Corvani war drums, their deep rhythm echoing through the hall as the wedding party entered. Jake walked with steady steps, flanked by Honor.